Let's jump right into a really fascinating and honestly pretty provocative piece of work, Michel Onfray's Tratado de Ateología, or the Atheist Manifesto. In this explainer, we're going to impartially map out the core arguments of a text that literally tries to shake the foundations of Western thought. Whether you find his ideas totally liberating or maybe deeply controversial, Onfray offers this incredibly unique lens into the history of religion and modern secularism. So let's unpack how he builds his case against monotheism step by step.
Section 1. The Desert and Faith, the Origins of Religion.
We're starting exactly where Onfray does, right under the scorching sun of the Mauritanian desert. In his preface, he paints this intensely vivid, harsh landscape. He talks about traveling through extreme exhaustion, white burning skies, calcined trees, and thorn bushes just getting dragged by the sand winds. And while watching his local guide pray under the night sky, Onfray proposes this really radical idea, that this profound physical depletion in a totally hostile environment is exactly what birthed religious thought.
It's a completely fascinating psychological premise. He argues that the brutal, dehydrating reality of earthly life in the ancient Middle East was deliberately contrasted with the luxurious fantasy of an oasis. I mean, think about it. If you are chronically hot, exhausted, and thirsty, heaven naturally becomes a place with abundant rivers, soft silk beds, and cool shade. According to Onfray, paradise is essentially just a psychological projection of exhausted people longing for exactly what they lack in reality. The subtitle Onfray chose is a huge clue to his approach. He calls it a manifesto for the physics of metaphysics. He doesn't just see this as a critique, it's an active manifesto. His whole goal is to bring these lofty, invisible concepts crashing back down to earth, explaining them through purely historical, physical, and psychological causes.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of Monotheism, the Structural Critique.
Onfray is incredibly methodical about all of this. His structure builds the case piece by piece. He starts by laying out a positive philosophy for atheism, moves into the shared traits of monotheisms, dissects the historical construction of Christianity, and finally warns us about the modern dangers of theocracy.
And here's his main takeaway on the big three. According to the author, despite massive theological and historical differences, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all operate on a shared mechanism. He argues they all demand submission and actually deny worldly joys in favor of an afterlife. In Onfray's view, they share a fundamental disdain for the physical body, for earthly pleasure, and for the reality we actually live in, trading it all for a promised utopia after we die.
Section 3. The Secular Infiltration, Hidden Religious Values.
Now, the most provocative part of his thesis is that these religious structures didn't just stay neatly inside the church or the mosque. To wrap our heads around this, we can look at Esther Díaz's prologue. She explains that Onfray champions what he calls positive nihilism, basically stripping the sky of false gods to fiercely affirm this life. This is his direct pushback against traditional negative nihilism, which he claims forces believers to invent artificial guilt and just submit to authority.
So Onfray traces how this ancient religious guilt subtly morphed into modern secular frameworks. He even points a finger directly at secular icons like Sigmund Freud. The book argues that Freud basically took the old religious concept of sin, filtered it through bourgeois morality, and rebranded the whole thing as clinical guilt. By categorizing non-traditional desires as disorders or hysteria, Freud was, in Onfray's eyes, essentially doing the exact work of a priest, just wearing a doctor's white coat.
He suggests this infiltration is literally everywhere. Think about our modern institutions for a second. Our lawmakers, our medical definitions of what's normal, our educational disciplines, are they truly secular? Onfray argues they are very often just secularized versions of ancient religious mandates, unconsciously designed to control the body and suppress earthly joy.
And to show just how incredibly seductive this underlying power dynamic can be, the prologue highlights a really surprising historical anecdote. The brilliant philosopher Michel Foucault initially supported the Ayatollah Khomeini during the Iranian Revolution, seeing it as this great modern rebellion. Foucault, a guy who dedicated his entire life to exposing systems of oppression, was initially totally blinded by theocratic power dynamics. It just goes to show how easily even the absolute sharpest secular minds can get caught in the web.
Section 4. The Influence of Nietzsche, the Philosophical Root.
To truly grasp the pure aggression of Onfray's perspective, we have to look at his ideological roots. He explicitly anchors his manifesto in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, the thinker who laid the real groundwork for dismantling divine concepts.
Onfray sees himself as picking up and carrying that exact philosophical torch.
Drawing directly from Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, Onfray highlights this incredibly powerful assertion that the very concept of God was invented as an antithesis to life itself. The argument here is that concepts like soul and sin were manufactured specifically to make us sick, to make us distrust our own natural instincts. Onfray essentially takes this Nietzschean hammer and starts swinging it at our modern institutions.
Section 5. Towards an atheology, a post-Christian era.
Having diagnosed the problem exactly as he sees it, what is Onfray's ultimate solution? Well, he advocates for a post-Christian secularism. For him, simply not believing in God just isn't enough. It's way too passive. He demands a vigilant atheology. That means an active philosophy that celebrates materialism, philosophical hedonism, and the absolute reality of the here and now. It's a strong call to reclaim the physical body, to celebrate worldly joy, and to fiercely guard against creeping theocratic morals.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating reflection. If Onfray is right, and the architecture of our supposedly secular minds was actually drafted by ancient theologies, if our laws and morals are just the shadows of dead gods, are we genuinely living in a secular age? How much of our everyday reality is actually our own? It's exactly the kind of critical question this explainer aims to spark. Thanks for exploring this one with us.